Lawrence O'Donnell. Good evening, Lawrence.
Good evening, Rachel. So it sounds like the New Hampshire lesson is a version of a lesson I think we've learned before. That if you're a Republican who was not previously judged to be incompetent, Donald Trump will take care of that. Donald Trump will get you declared and revealed to be completely incompetent, at least if it involves going up against any horrible thing Donald Trump wants to do to your constituents.
Or even exhibiting any clarity whatsoever when it comes to something that your constituents want. I mean, if Kelly Ayotte had the stones to come out and say, I recognize that the dumb liberals of my state don't want a Trump prison camp here, but we patriots would love to have one. I mean, she could try something like that, right? And it would at least have some coherence. Or she could come out and say, like Mississippi Senator Roger Wicker did, and say, like, oh, this isn't good for Mississippi, don't put one here. She could try either of those things, but instead what she's saying is, I don't know whether this is okay, but I would definitely like to be CC'd on all the letters. And I'm confused as to whether or not it's happening. Like, talk about absolutely blowing it in every direction. I at least thought that Kelly Ayotte had political peripheral vision. Like, I thought I thought she was a competent Paul, whether or not I've ever agreed with her on anything. But I just haven't seen a political performance this pitiful at a state governance level like since COVID.
Yeah, and the governor's staff could simply get a copy of Senator Wicker's letter, which is public, which we read on this TV show.
It's saying on the internet.
Saying to Kristi Noem, not only do I not want you to try to do this, one of these facilities in the small town in Mississippi they were trying to do it in, but don't try to do it in the state of Mississippi. Stay out of the state of Mississippi. It's all in polite senatorial language. It's really easy to copy. You can just write one of those and send them to Kristi Noem.
And instead, Kelly Ayotte is now succeeding before now in keeping her head below water and not really being tarred with the brush of being a Trump-era Republican, therefore potentially having some future political campaigns, potentially even national political campaigns ahead of her, right? Except this is the way that she wants to make herself known nationally, as the governor with the nation's most embarrassing and pitiful performance on the issue of whether or not the Donald Trump presidency will include the building of a gulag archipelago. I mean, it's just...
Yeah, and Senator Wicker's letter actually makes the case that is the opposite case of the Trump propaganda stuff, which is these kinds of things are bad economically. They are harmful to the local economy. They overburden the local medical systems, which normally have, if they have a hospital, it's a small hospital that can't handle this giant increase in the population, what would be the incarcerated population there. Those people incarcerated still need health care. They still need water supply. They still need electricity. They need all of that. And the local infrastructure doesn't have it. The Wicker letter is just a perfect model for every Republican out there who doesn't want these in their state, which is every Republican except the governor of New Hampshire, I guess.
The governor of New Hampshire, who isn't in favor, she just doesn't know.
Right.
She doesn't know how she feels about it. It's just, it's absolutely amazing. So, I mean, we will see what would happen. Talking to my guest tonight, the state rep from New Hampshire, about what she said, and I did not know this, and I have not verified it, but what my guest asserted is that the owner of the facility that was sold to ICE is an Ayotte donor, a major Ayotte donor, and we'll look into that. If that proves to be the case, that means that Ayotte had, even more so than Roger Wicker, she would have had leverage over whether or not this happened, over and above your typical politician's leverage, if this was one of her major donors. And if she didn't exert that leverage and professes to be confused and is trying to get away with taking no position while the rest of her state and that town are against it, I mean, I just think she's toast.
Rachel, thanks for bringing the story to this network. We will be following it.
Thanks, Lawrence.
Thanks, Rachel. Thank you. Okay, if the kids are nearby, gather them together around the TV so that they can hear a president speak on President's Day. Not the current president, of course, On this President's Day 2026, the current president, as usual, gave himself a day off, which was not the idea when President's Day was created. Donald Trump, who spent the day at his Florida golf club, posted a President's Day greeting to the world, claiming that he was, quote, working hard. No one believes that. In fact, a solid majority of the country doesn't believe Donald Trump is working hard any day of the week, with 62% now disapproving of the way Donald Trump does and does not do his job as president. In 1879, 90 years after George Washington took the oath of office, and 80 years after he died, the United States Congress made George Washington's birthday, February 22nd, a national holiday. Later, some states made Abraham Lincoln's birthday a holiday. In 1971, most states agreed to combine those holidays into what we now call President's Day and set that for the third Monday of February. And the president then didn't think, oh boy, they made a holiday for me to take the day off. In fact, on President's Day in 1972, Richard Nixon was actually working hard as president, doing one of the very few good things he did as president, making his first trip to China. Richard Nixon was literally making history on that President's Day by making the first trip by a president of the United States to China. With a barely literate, profane vulgarian living on most weekdays in the portion of the White House that he has not yet torn down, America has lost any expectation of decency or intelligence or wisdom or even coherent speech from the president. High school students in America today, many of whom are listening to a president for the first time, are hearing the stupidest things ever said in the White House. This is a day to teach those high school students and to remind voters that the hateful venom and incoherent ravings of Donald Trump are unique to his presidency. The first president of the 21st century, Republican George W. Bush, published an article today about George Washington and released an audio version of that article in which President George W. Bush said the most non-controversial things that could be said about George Washington, and which every president other than Donald Trump hoped would be said about them.
Our first leader helped define not only the character of the presidency, but the character of the country. Washington modeled what it means to put the good of the nation over self-interest and selfish ambitions. He embodied integrity and modeled why it's worth aspiring to. And he carried himself with dignity and self-restraint, honoring the office without allowing it to become invested with near mythical powers.
President Bush's article was immediately interpreted to be an attack on Donald Trump simply because it used the word humility. And by just describing the positive attributes that you just heard, everyone hearing those attributes knows that Donald Trump embodies the opposite and literally does try to invest himself with near mythical powers by frequently posting memes of himself that you don't have to be a psychiatrist to know are filled with self-loathing. Donald Trump actually advances these cartoon versions of himself, looking, to his mind, strikingly handsome and young and muscular and all-powerful, and of course, looking nothing at all like himself, a look he must despise, the look of a 79-year-old man in obviously declining mental and physical health. George W. Bush's 1,200 words about George Washington do not include a single word of profanity, which would never be noteworthy until the Trump-Vance administration, in which both Donald Trump and James David Vance seem to regard their public use of profanity as proof of the toughness of their leadership. In fact, Donald Trump's public presidential profanity is the product of both limited brain function and the smallest vocabulary ever possessed by a president of the United States. As our worst president, Donald Trump stands alone. Every other president, including Richard Nixon, who committed crimes in office, stands above Donald Trump. But no president is more fully opposite to Donald Trump than Barack Obama, the overtly racist president and the only black president. So on this President's Day, when the United States of America would be better off with any previous occupant of the White House than we are with Donald Trump, we can best observe President's Day here by listening to President Obama, who appeared on Brian Tyler Cohen's podcast released over the weekend. President Obama offered a 47-minute rebuke to Donald Trump simply by being himself. President Obama did what Donald Trump never does. He actually answered every question, really answered the questions. The Washington Press Corps often gives Donald Trump unearned points for taking questions from them, even though Donald Trump never actually answers those questions. He simply throws live-filled gibberish at the reporters who ask the questions, most of whom never actually attempt to get an answer from Donald Trump. As a reminder of what's it like to listen to a president who can speak and think and feel at the same time, here is President Obama's full 5-minute answer to Brian Tyler Cohen's first excellent question. The answer includes words Donald Trump doesn't understand, like decency, courtesy, kindness. But the answer also embodies those words as Barack Obama's response to Donald Trump's racist poison.
As you know better than anybody, the discourse has devolved into a level of cruelty that we haven't seen before. What was disqualifying just a few years ago now not only feels fine, acceptable, but actually rewarded. You have administration officials saying that the victims of ISIS aggression are domestic terrorists. You have J.D. Vance coming out and saying that it's okay, you don't have to apologize for being white. Just days ago, Donald Trump put a picture of your face on an ape's body. And so again, this is kind of, we've seen the de-evolution of the discourse. How do we come back from a place that we have fallen into?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to recognize that the majority of the American people find this behavior deeply troubling. It is true that it gets attention. It's true that it's a distraction. But as I'm traveling around the country, as you're traveling around the country, you meet people. They still believe in decency, courtesy, kindness, and there's this sort of clown show that's happening in social media and on television, and what is true is that there doesn't seem to be any shame about this among people who used to feel like you had to have some sort of decorum and a sense of propriety and respect for the office, right? So that's been lost. But the reason I point out that I don't think the majority of the American people approve of this is because ultimately the answer is going to come from the American people. And we just saw this in Minnesota, in Minneapolis. It is important for us to recognize the unprecedented nature of what ICE was doing in Minneapolis, St. Paul, the way that federal agents, ICE agents, were being deployed without any clear guidelines, training, pulling people off, out of their homes, using 5-year-olds to try to
bait their parents.
Yeah. All the stuff that we saw, tear gassing crowds simply who were standing there, not breaking any laws. So the rogue behavior of agents of the federal government is deeply concerning and dangerous. But we should take a moment to appreciate the extraordinary outpouring of organizing, community building, decency, neighbors, buying groceries for folks, accompanying children to school, teachers who were standing up for their kids, not just randomly, but in a systematic, organized way, citizens saying, this is not the America we believe in, and we're going to fight back, and we're going to push back with the truth, and with cameras, and with peaceful protests, and shining a light on the sort of behavior that in the past we've seen in authoritarian countries, and we've seen in dictatorships, but we have not seen in America. And that kind of heroic, sustained behavior in sub-zero weather by ordinary people is what should give us hope. And it should remind us that at the end of the day, the way we get a democracy that's working, the way we get policies that actually are helping working families get ahead, the way that we restore norms, rule of law, decency, it's going to be because we, citizens, are activated and paying attention and saying enough and saying, we have a different idea of what the American family should look like and community should look like. And that is what I'm seeing across the board. So, I was on a panel a while back, and I said, a lot of the values that we say we subscribe to, during easy times, during peaceful times, it's easy to say we believe in those things.
Right, when they're not challenged.
When they're not challenged. It's easy to believe in free speech when it doesn't seem like the government's trying to crack down on free speech. It's easy to say that we believe in the golden rule when we aren't at risk of being arrested when we exercise the golden rule.
Yeah.
Right now we're being tested. And the good news is what we saw in Minneapolis and St. Paul, and what we're seeing in places across the country, including here in Los Angeles, has been the American people saying, no, you know what, at least a good number of the American people saying, we're going to live up to those values that we say we believe in. And as long as we have folks doing that, I feel like we're going to get through this.
President Obama offered what he believes is a winning formula for Democratic Party unity.
If you want to create an environment that is welcoming and makes people feel, okay, there's room for me here, then the message and the story we tell has to be, all right, none of us are perfect. All of us count. We all have good in us that we can tap into. We can all learn from each other. And I think that is something we need to recover. That's part of the fun of politics. That's part of the community and the social bonding that can come about. And we saw that in Minneapolis. I mean, somebody showed me a friend of mine, Michelle Norris, is from Minnesota, and she was up there, and she was going around talking to neighbors and people she'd known for a long time as they were mobilizing protests and activities around ICE. And she showed me a clip of this street band that was performing every night after all these activities had been taking place and protests, etc. And they were just out there and they were playing music, and I'm trying to figure out how they were playing, horns and drums, etc. in like 0-degree weather, because I would not have been able to put my lips on on a trumpet. And people were celebrating what they had accomplished. And it was an embodiment of the values that make us care about other people. And that, I think, is a spirit that when Democrats tap into that spirit, then we win. The other side does the mean, angry,
demagoguery,
exclusive, us, them, divisive politics. That's their home court.
Yeah.
Our court is coming together.
You should give yourself the President's Day treat of watching Brian Tyler Cohen's full interview with President Obama on Brian's YouTube channel. Congressman Ro Khanna will join us next. Thomas Massey says this is the Epstein administration.
This is about the Epstein class, the people who are funding the attacks against me. They may or may not be implicated in these files, but they were certainly rubbing shoulders with the people who are in these files. Donald Trump told us that even though, he had dinner with these kinds of people in New York City and West Palm Beach, that he would be transparent, but he's not. He's still in with the Epstein class. This is the Epstein administration, and they're attacking me for trying to get these files released.
On Air Force One tonight, Donald Trump said, quote, "I have nothing to hide." That's what people who have things to hide always say. And the Justice Department that he controls is still hiding information in the Epstein files, even though Donald Trump's Attorney General now claims that she has released all of the Epstein files. Donald Trump's Attorney General released a list of all the names that appear in the Epstein files as if they are all equal, including Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley, and a list with billionaire Les Wexner, who was listed as an Epstein co-conspirator in the Epstein files. And Les Wexner's criminal defense attorney has said that he was told by federal officials, who he's never named, that Les Wexner was not a co-conspirator, and that he cooperated with the investigation. That has not been corroborated yet in the Epstein files. Marilyn Monroe died in 1962 when Jeffrey Epstein was 9 years old. So names mentioned in emails of historical figures are not the same as Donald Trump being mentioned in the Epstein files by one estimate over 1 million times. Our next guest, Congressman Ro Khanna, the author of the law that forces the Trump Justice Department to release the Epstein files, says that the list of names of people has nothing to do with, who have nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein, or is mixed in with the co-conspirators, is simply Donald Trump's Justice Department's way of trying to confuse people. Congressman Khanna says, quote, "The DOJ is once again purposefully muddying the waters on who was a predator and who was mentioned in an email. To have Janis Joplin, who died when Epstein was 17, in the same list as Larry Nassar, who went to prison for the sexual abuse of hundreds of young women and child pornography, with no clarification of how either was mentioned in the files, is absurd." Donald Trump's former top aide and current supporter and confidant, Steve Bannon, is revealed in the Epstein files to have been, quote, "advising Mr. Epstein on how to handle resurrected allegations that he was a serial pedophile. Mr. Bannon recommended which lawyers to hire, his own, when to lie low, and when he should jump on an opening to push his narrative. He scheduled what the two men called media training." And then there is this text exchange. In December of 2018, after the Democrats won control of the House of Representatives, Jeffrey Epstein says, quote, "He really is borderline, not sure what he may do." Steve Bannon replies, "I think it's beyond borderline. 25th Amendment." And yesterday, former Republican Congressman and former Trump supporter Marjorie Taylor Greene posted this on social media: "All of you mega influencers and the rest mocking the seriousness of women who were trafficked and raped as teenagers and young women look like cult fools. Good luck trying to get women to vote for Republicans in the midterms, you insensitive clowns. The Republican Party already has a woman voting problem. Keep mocking those of us who take rape and pedophilia seriously and demand accountability for corruption." Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna of California. He's a member of the House Oversight Committee. Congressman Khanna, you have now been officially informed that you have 100% of the Epstein files.
Well, that's just wrong. And it's not just Thomas Massie and I who are now calling it out, not just Marjorie Taylor Greene who's calling it out. People like Tim Burchett, people like Nancy Mace are saying this is just not transparent. Even Senator Kennedy is saying this is not transparent. And the reality is they're muddying the water. I mean, instead of focusing on people like Lutnick, people like the ambassador in Turkey, people like the Stephen Bannon, who had actual correspondence or relationships with Epstein, they're just putting out every public figure. And not only is that letting off people who actually may have been involved in illegal or immoral behavior, but it's also breeding such cynicism because, as your monologue showed, there are people like President Obama who didn't get anywhere close to this, who are decent, who are moral, who believe in the rule of law and America's character. And for them to try to conflate everyone is a terrible disservice to democracy.
What are your next steps?
Well, we're contemplating several things. Nancy Mace has actually offered an idea of whether we have to have another legislative approach in Congress to clarify further the law. And remember, Lawrence, the first bill passed 427 to 1 and 100 to 0 in the Senate. So there are veto-proof majorities that we could have. There are survivors who could bring a case before Judge Engelmeyer and Judge Berman in the Southern District of New York. Thomas Massie or I may bring that case. We, as you recall, asked for a special master for this purpose. Now, Judge Engelmeyer ruled that we needed to actually bring a motion, an actual case, and we're contemplating that.
The Epstein files, unless they're destroyed by this administration and Donald Trump gives pardons to the people who destroy them, will be there when a Democrat wins the White House next time, presumably in the next presidential election, and a new attorney general. What do you anticipate they might be doing in the Justice Department in anticipation of someday having to hand over to a Democratic attorney general the Epstein files?
I believe they're trying to cover up as much as they can of people close to the president or in his network. I mean, we know that the FBI already scrubbed these files with redactions, and we don't know where the existing files are. But I don't want to wait 3 years. I mean, you have France saying that they're going to prosecute anyone who's involved. New Mexico just today said they want to open up an investigation into the ranch. You have other nations that are holding their government leaders accountable and wanting to investigate. And only in the United States of America is our DOJ saying we're done, we want to move on, no investigation, no prosecutions. And then you have a Commerce Secretary who's all over the files, lied about it, and no consequence. This is an affront to survivors, and it is questioning our morality as a nation.
I want to listen to more of what your legislative partner on this, Republican Thomas Massie, said on ABC yesterday.
They're citing deliberative process privilege in order not to release some of the documents. The problem with that is the bill that Ro Khanna and I wrote says that they must release internal memos and notes and emails about their decisions on whether to prosecute or not prosecute, whether to investigate or not investigate. It's important they follow that because then we could find why they didn't prosecute Leslie Wexner. What was the decision tree there? And also why in 2008 they gave Jeffrey Epstein such a light sentence.
Congressman Khanna, that seems to be the very point of your legislation, to get at that kind of material.
Absolutely. They didn't hand us any of the information about why Jeffrey Epstein was not charged, why his co-conspirators were not charged, why these powerful men for decades got away with this and were above the law. And it's important not just for justice for survivors, it's important at a look at the two tiers of justice in America and how to fix this. But most shockingly, when Thomas Massie and I went to see the files, when Jamie Raskin has gone to see the files, Maxwell Frost has gone to see the files, they see total blanking out of the survivor statements to the FBI agents. And that is the most important thing, those 302 forums where the survivors name names of people who abused them, of people who turned a blind eye with the abuse, and they are protecting those folks. And it's not just Thomas Massie or me. Now the country is really up in arms, and this is not just going to go away. It's not going to go away because of people like you, because of the survivors, and because many Republicans now have been totally dissatisfied with how Bondi and Blanche have handled this.
Carson Ro Khanna, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Coming up, the New York Times editorial board says that the Attorney General's release of the Epstein files has shown her grotesque incompetence. We'll discuss that with Andrew Weissman next. In a lifetime of reading the New York Times, you would not read an editorial officially declaring the Attorney General of the United States to be incompetent. Until now. Saturday's New York Times editorial is titled, "Bondi's Incompetence is the Latest Insult for Epstein's Victims." The editorial says, the hearing in the House Judiciary Committee room this week offered a grim tableau of the state of American justice. Sitting in the gallery were victims of Jeffrey Epstein, women who have waited decades for clarity and accountability. Sitting before them was Attorney General Pam Bondi. When offered the opportunity to apologize to these women for the Department of Justice's disastrous handling of the Epstein files, Ms. Bondi didn't just decline, she sneered. Ms. Bondi's performance was more than just political theater. It was a final indignity in a process that has victimized Mr. Epstein's victims all over again. Under the guise of transparency, the Justice Department has managed to expose the victims to further humiliation while shielding the powerful behind a wall of redactions. The department's release of these files has been dominated by incompetence. Ms. Bondi has long had the authority to make them public, but she spent months refusing and yielded only after Congress forced her hand. Her department was then tasked with a clear mandate: release the information while protecting the victim's privacy, national security, and active investigations. Instead, in a grotesque failure, the DOJ uploaded dozens of unredacted images to its website, including nude photographs of young women and possibly teenagers. Ms. Bondi's refusal to look the survivors in the eye was symbolic of a broader failure. The Department of Justice had an opportunity to finally prioritize the women who were preyed upon by Mr. Epstein and his circle. Instead, through a combination of malice and incompetence, it has done the opposite. It has stripped the victims of their privacy while wrapping perpetrators in a cloak of state secrecy. Joining us now is Andrew Weissman, former FBI General Counsel and an MS Now legal analyst. Andrew, that's an editorial that you could live a lifetime expecting to never read, that it would ever come to this for an attorney general.
Yes, and I think, I know it's beautifully written and well said, but I think that gross incompetence is in many ways charitable, because some of the things that the Attorney General did were deliberate. I thought its use of the term malice was particularly appropriate. Let's just talk about some deliberate things that she did. She deliberately refused to acknowledge the victims, to apologize in any way, shape, or form for the way they had been treated, not just by her administration, but other administrations as well. But that's a deliberate choice. That's not incompetence. There was incompetence in the way things were released, absolutely. She deliberately decided to say that everyone knows there's no evidence that the president did anything wrong. That's simply not true. That is something that is in the released files. The allegations may prove to be untrue, but it's simply not true that there's no evidence that the president has done anything wrong. There is evidence. We just don't know whether there was an investigation into it or not. And finally, she decided that she would not tell the American people that every last document related to Donald Trump and every image of Donald Trump has now been released. Those are all deliberate choices by her that are not just the results of incompetence or malice. They are, in my view, they are things that are either just absolutely flagrantly wrong or in violation of the Epstein Transparency Act, that is a congressional law that she decided to violate.
On Wednesday, the House committee is going to have a deposition of Les Wexner. They're going to Ohio to do that, where he lives, the billionaire who's listed as a co-conspirator in some of the Epstein files with Jeffrey Epstein. He has a criminal defense lawyer who just says that someone, doesn't say who, told him that Wexner was never really a suspect. Is that the kind of thing that can be penetrated in questioning in this deposition?
Absolutely. The question can be, who said that? What exactly did they say? Did they say he wasn't a target or a subject of the investigation? I'd be interested in knowing that. Those are very technical words, and they have some technical meanings. They can also get a sense of essentially, why is it that Jeffrey Epstein, with not a lot of background, suddenly became so wealthy through Mr. Wexner? Like, what was that relationship? And then also some sense of the investigation, like what was actually done, what they heard, who they've talked to about other people being investigated. That's something that Mr. Wexner likely knows, not the full extent of what the Department of Justice did, but when you are in that position, one of the things your lawyer and investigators might do is have a real sense of who the other people are who are being targeted, so you can better defend yourself. So all of that is material that can be pursued. And remember, the Epstein Transparency Act is broad, as Congressman Massey said, in terms of the kinds of privileges that you can claim. They're very few. The department has taken a view that is directly contrary to the law. And so in asking these questions, remember, the statute they're relying on permits them to ask very broad questions.
Andrew, we have to take a break here. Please stay with us. When we come back, I want to talk about the investigation of Alex Pretty's death in Minneapolis and how the Donald Trump's Justice Department is now trying to block any access to the key evidence in that. We're going to be right back with Andrew. Announced that Donald Trump's Federal Bureau of Investigation is refusing to turn over evidence in the case of Veterans Affairs nurse Alex Pretty, who was shot and killed by Donald Trump's invasion forces in January in Minneapolis. In a statement, Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension Superintendent Drew Evans said the FBI formally notified the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension on February 13th that it will not provide the BCA with access to any information or evidence that it has collected in the January 24th shooting death of Alex Pretty. While this lack of cooperation is concerning and unprecedented, the BCA is committed to thorough, independent, and transparent investigations of these incidents, even if hampered by a lack of access to key information and evidence. Andrew Weissman is back with us. Andrew, what can Minnesota do?
They can sue, but I think the easiest thing here is for Congress. The Democrats have said that they're going to insist, if there's going to be funding, that there has to be sharing of information. And I should point out, it's not just Alex Pretty who was killed. It's also Renee Good. People tend to just focus on Alex Pretty, but there seems to be no investigation the Department of Justice or anyone else is doing of that shooting. I know there's been a talk of an investigation the department's doing of Ms. Good herself and her widow, shockingly, but not of the agents. And let me just remind people, there's no good reason, if you're not protecting these agents, to not give access to the state so there can be an independent and fair investigation. My question would be, what are you so afraid of? Why are you not doing this? And Congress really has the ability here to say, you know what, we're not going to fund an agency that acts like this. Final quick point. The other man who was shot by ICE in Minnesota, There now is very good evidence that ICE lied about that shooting. The case against him was dismissed. The reports that there now is an investigation, which is good, of those agents. So there's substantial reason, although they're different agents, it's the same Trump administration agencies who are at issue here. There's substantial reason to have an independent investigation of what is going on and sort of how out of control is ICE in Minnesota, and is somebody going to be held responsible?
The county prosecutor who we've had on this program repeatedly talking about this, who has jurisdiction over these homicide cases, is absolutely determined to go ahead with this as a homicide investigation, even if she doesn't get the evidence that's currently in the possession of the FBI.
Look, I think that's terrific, and it's great that she does that. But you know what? Prosecutors have to, if they are going to bring a case, they have to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt. And so you want your hands on all of the forensic evidence. You want to be able to answer any question that the defense raises. And so that is really going to be like trying to bring a case with one arm tied behind your back. And there's no reason for it. I mean, to me, at some point, this really looks like obstruction of their investigation. It's remarkable to me that we are funding an agency that is acting like this. Let me just make sure people understand what the state is asking for is access to the information. They're not saying that we want to take it and exclude the Federal Bureau of Investigation or any other agency. It simply said they can share it. There's no good reason not to allow that kind of sharing in this case.